Welcome to the Healing Sexual Trauma Summit. I am Marcy Little, your host, and with me today is Atira Tan. Atira, welcome.
Thank you, Marcy. It's great to be here.
So honored to have you today. Okay, before I tell you more about how incredible Atira Tan is and all of the work that she offers to this world, let's just take a moment to get really present, or as present as you can. And if you feel like it, you could close your eyes. If that doesn't feel right to you, leave them open. And just sort of begin by noticing that you have a body and that you're here in a body. And if there's any way that your body wants to move as you begin to settle, go ahead and allow that. And you may bring your awareness into your feet. Just notice the sensation of your feet and whatever they're touching. And notice the sensation of your body and whatever it's sitting on. And you may begin to notice the natural flow of your own breath, the rise and fall of the rib cage. You can take a moment to just check in, to notice any sensations that are happening at the moment in your body, places of tightness or ease. Invitation as you listen to Atira talk today is to pay attention and to continue to notice any shifts in sensation. You may notice yourself feeling triggered or overwhelmed. And if that starts to happen, if your breath gets shallow, just hit the pause button, give yourself a break, and come back when you need to or when you're ready. And also when you're ready, we'll bring ourselves back. Take your time, take the time you need. You can open your eyes again. Atira and I are here. All right. Atira, a TED speaker, activist, somatic trauma specialist, #1 best-selling author and yoga teacher and group facilitator. Atira Tan is a powerful agent of transformation and change. She has touched the lives of thousands of women, men, and children around the world, from brothels in Nepal to the indigenous communities of the Australian desert, supporting trauma recovery through her 17 years of experience in various somatic and creative trauma recovery approaches. Atira Tan, we are so glad to have you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Marcy. It's an honor and such a delight to be here to share a topic that I'm really, really passionate about, which is the restoration, of sexual abuse recovery. So thank you so much for this invitation, and everyone there that's watching. I really warmly welcome you to this session, and I'm really happy that you're here. Before we start, one of the things that I like to start with is just to take a moment to acknowledge the, traditional owners of the land that we walk on. And I would really be so delighted if you could take some time to really connect your feet to the ground that you're walking on, and take a moment to thank and acknowledge the indigenous people of the world who are custodians of the land that nurtures us, that we all walk on. And for me right now, I am in Thailand, in the north of Thailand, where I really acknowledge the Lana people as traditional owners of the land that I walk on. And their land is imbued with so much wisdom, and so much wisdom in meditation that I feel grateful to be at. So as we take some time to connect to the ground as a support and acknowledging the custodians of this land, I'd like to share a little bit on how this body of work that I'm teaching you, which is a somatic experiencing kind of approach that was created by Dr. Peter Levine. And I would like to share a little bit on how that kind of came about, because what I'm sharing today is one of the first somatic experiencing kind of trauma institute endorsed program for sex trafficked survivors and exploitation, and for people, folks that have experienced sexual abuse. So in addition to kind of what Marcy has, all the introduction, one of my biggest passions in life is the charity that I run, which is called Art to Healing, which I'm the founder and international program director of. And our mission for the past, 14, 15 years has really been to support the end of the vicious cycle of child sex slavery, both through somatic and also creative trauma therapy programs and specialized kind of mental health care to women and children who have experienced both gender-based violence and also sex trafficking, so that they can be free from slavery. So really, it has been an honor for me to work and hold the hearts and bodies of the women and girls that I work with. And I really want to pay homage to them, as they have, they're the ones that have really taught me a lot about the process of recovery from sexual violence, especially in a cross-cultural setting. So what I've found in my body of work over the past 17 years is that the body is really key, especially in the recovery of sexual violence. Firstly, to establish a felt sense of safety in the body. And also, when we can feel safe inside, we can start to listen to our instinctual biophysiological responses in what we needed at that time to be safe, and also to protect ourselves and to cultivate and restore healthy boundaries, which is one of a really big kind of phase in sexual abuse recovery. And when we can listen to this instinctual intelligence in our body, instead of perhaps overriding them, then we can reconnect to our innate aliveness, our sense of pleasure, which is our birthright, and also a sense of self to restore our own resilience and goodness and agency. So today in this talk, I'm going to be diving deep with Marcy today to share that process from a somatic experiencing perspective.
Okay.
Yay. Yeah. So I would like to slowly just move into the topic of, what is sexual trauma, just for us to kind of be clear about that. And as I move into more of a dialogue about sexual trauma, I would love to really again acknowledge Dr. Peter Levine and this approach that he has created called somatic experiencing, which I have found, very, very helpful for many of our clients, and something that I'm sharing with you today. So, yeah. So first of all, I like to share that sexual trauma can actually be many things. And we use this umbrella term to describe any sexual act that is imposed on another person without their consent. So sometimes the word abuse is used to indicate that, violence was ongoing or it was long-term or cumulative. But sexual kind of trauma can also be a one-time event. It can also be perhaps an ongoing experience. And it's really important to take note that sexual trauma does not have to be physically violent, because everyone reacts to sexual trauma in their own way. And so everyone kind of response afterwards is different too. So when we work with sexual trauma, it's very important not to kind of compare our trauma to others, because we are individual people and we all have different levels of resiliency, sensitivity, and needs.
I love that.
Yeah.
I feel like that's
Yeah.
such an important piece, and it's so easy to do just what you're saying, which is to compare ourselves like, oh, well, mine wasn't as bad as so, and you know what they lived through, so I should be fine. Yeah. So I feel like
Yeah.
it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So different people have different kind of sensitivity, and I'll talk more about, you know, sometimes people think that sexual trauma is, it has to be around, you know, penetration, penetrative sex, but actually it's really about a person's connection to safety and, you know, how safe they're feeling in a certain experience. So examples of sexual trauma and abuse could be, you know, on a spectrum, things like sexual assault, rape, you know, sexual abuse, but it could also be things like stalking, where a person is stalking us with sexual advances and we don't feel safe, sexual harassment, even street harassment, or even further down in the spectrum, you know, we have childhood sexual abuse or sexual abuse that happens in the family where we actually know and the person is supposed to be our protector, but they were the one that caused harm to us. Sex trafficking is something that I work with, or even online kind of sexual harassment or sexual violence in relationships. And I would even go as far as to say, especially in this area, you know, in our genitals and our pelvis, where this place is extremely, you know, sensitive, even experiences like medical procedures that, you know, our body wasn't ready for, we could also present with, you know, symptoms of sexual trauma, even though that wasn't what happened to us. But I would also count it perhaps in this category because the body might not have been ready for the medical procedure in this area. And what some of the signs and symptoms that come up is also very connected to the signs and symptoms as well of sexual trauma. Yeah. So the best way of perhaps understanding sexual trauma is to refer to the definition of trauma. And here I'm going to talk and share a definition of trauma according to Dr. Peter Levine. And in his book, Waking the Tiger, there is a really simple kind of definition that I would love to share with all of you, which is trauma, simply put, arises, number one, when there is lack of choice and something that we feel unable to escape from. And this inability to escape creates an overwhelm in our nervous system, and it leads us to disconnection from ourselves and also from other people. And it really affects and impacts our ability to be present, not just with ourselves, but also with people around us and also our environment in the present moment. So as we take in this definition, sexual trauma could include any kind of sexual experience where there was a lack of choice. So, you know, I think that what happens with a lot of, you know, sexual abuse survivors is that they might think that it's their fault because perhaps, you know, they didn't get the chance to push someone away, or they went into a freeze, they couldn't, you know, ask for support or help. But it's really not a survivor's fault, you know, when that happens, because when there is a lack of choice and we feel unable to escape from, we are overwhelmed. And when we are in a place of overwhelm, it's really easy to go into a place of freeze where we can disassociate with our, you know, from our bodies as a result of not feeling safe. So again, you know, it's really about how we feel safe in an experience. So this also includes any sexualized behavior that could be imposed, and it doesn't actually need to be penetrative sex. So it could be a general feeling of being unsafe. And that can actually overwhelm us already, just this general sense of not feeling safe. So I guess what I would love to invite our audience is really to come to a place of really deep compassion for ourselves, because this feeling of unsafety, not feeling safe in the body, can really thwart our kind of protective responses, and we're not able to kind of respond in that moment when we are not feeling safe and when we're feeling overwhelmed. And this category of trauma in somatic experiencing is categorized under what we call a boundary violation. Yeah. And it can also be called an inescapable attack, which is why I shared before that even in the surgery or perhaps an invasive procedure around this area of the genitals or the pelvic area, even though the trauma is not sexual in nature, still the experience of not having choice, which actually happens in many medical procedures, and a person of authority telling us that we have to do something, and when we are scared, it can also create a sense of numbness or disassociation or fear in this part of our body. Yeah. So I just kind of want to just gently name that sexual trauma can actually be a spectrum, and it's never the survivor's fault. When we are in a place of overwhelm, it's really hard for us to respond in that particular moment. So another aspect of sexual trauma that I wanted to name, which is mostly the survivors that I work with, both in private practice as well as with Art to Healing, is really child sexual abuse. And with child sexual abuse, it can be very intense because during our childhood, these are also our developmental years. And during our developmental years, when we are growing up, it's important that we have safety, so that we can grow into our wholeness and blossom into our wholeness. And when that kind of safety is not kind of met, it can really affect our nervous system. And it can also throw us into this other kind of trauma category called, in somatic experiencing, a global high intensity activation, which means that especially if there is, childhood sexual abuse in the home with somebody that we know, it can create a very unsafe environment for us where we are constantly kind of either hypervigilant or hyper aroused. And this can create very intense and even pervasive emotional and physical dysregulation for us, because we need that, right? We need to be on all the time, to be alert and aware if danger is coming to us. So there is tendency for some of these trauma survivors to swing from being kind of very hyper aroused, which means that they are kind of very hyper vigilant all the time, and they can swing to being hypo aroused, which is being fully off all the time. So not having any energy, feeling that they can't protect themselves, feeling kind of helpless or hopeless or depressed, are some of the spectrums that survivors can swing into with very little mid-range. And with global high intensity activation, it's quite common that there is very limited resiliency in regard to stress, because the whole entire system is focused on protection and danger. So as you can imagine, like a kind of house, like if our nervous system was a house, and if our house alarm, like the alarm bell was on all the time, how stressed we would get. So it's a little bit like that for these survivors, which is why we really need to have a lot of compassion for ourselves and also for others when they've been through these experiences. So a lot of the time in global high intensity activation, it means that the person's nervous system is very highly activated, and it's something that happens throughout the whole body. So there is a massive amount of energy which is mobilized to defend the body. And this high energy can be left kind of unprocessed. So, when a client comes, they can kind of be in the state of extremely high arousal that requires a lot of kind of stabilization work and a lot of titration. Yeah. So I like to just, take a sacred pause here and invite the audience just to breathe. I know that, naming all these certain things can perhaps bring back memories of our own experiences, or perhaps we might have, people that are close to us that we care about, that we notice, these kind of activation symptoms arising. I'm just going to take a deep, compassionate breath just into the body right now. And let's feel the ground under us again to help center us.
It's very restabilizing to do that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, just finding our feet on the ground, feeling our body. Yeah, and just that invitation back to that place of compassion, I think, is such a huge antidote for the recovery of sexual trauma. So from this place, I'd like to share a little bit more about, so we've heard a little bit about like the signs and symptoms of trauma. And now I would like to go more into the recovery of sexual trauma and the antidote. So as a trauma therapist, when I'm with clients, what I'm really looking for is the antidote. So what did, this certain person, what did they need in that traumatic event that they didn't get? So the antidote to sexual violence, or really any form of violence or any kind of boundary violation, is really to resolve the organic impulses of the fight or flight response, and to help survivors explore what healthy boundaries are, because their boundaries were kind of impinged or thwarted. And when that happens to a person, they're not able to really go into fight or flight. So the only place that they can go into is a freeze, which means that these fight and flight energy remains kind of trapped in their nervous system. And sometimes this can be reignited or triggered into feelings of extreme anger or extreme fear. If in the present moment, perhaps they are noticing danger, and perhaps someone is doing something that doesn't feel right to them in terms of their boundaries, they can come up as, rage or being extremely kind of scared and going back into a freeze again. So another way of saying this is that during the sexual kind of trauma or event, their natural impulses to defend themselves by running away or fighting back were either overwhelmed, and it caused their body to kind of shut down, or they had to kind of stop these responses in order to avoid kind of further injury. So this really happens involuntarily, which is why it's important, I think, for sexual abuse survivors to know that it's not their fault. When they don't feel that they have the capacity to ask for help or to kind of run away, this is because, the nervous system is unconscious. And in order to really protect themselves or yourself, the nervous system goes into a freeze, which often feels, when we are stuck in freeze, the sensation of being helpless, collapse, or ashamed, or shut down. And this can be something that is very, very, painful for a survivor. However, when these natural impulse protective defenses are resolved and restored, then actually the survivor can return to a feeling of safety in the body. And this is really important, I think, in sexual abuse, with sexual abuse, is to reclaim the sense of wellness, aliveness, but also safety, safety in the body. So therefore, the body is really key here, because in sexual abuse, violence happens in the body. So different kind of modalities, like talk modalities, for instance, I've found is not super helpful in sexual abuse recovery, because the violation happened in the body. So the body is really key to help reclaim that felt sense of safety. So it's not just an idea, but it's actually something that survivors can feel inside and their nervous systems can enjoy and absorb. And when we can do that, then we can establish a new dialogue and a new relationship to the body, which is really important. Yeah. So I find that somatic experiencing or perhaps other kind of somatic approaches can be more helpful than talk therapy or mentalization, because in a lot of kind of sexual abuse, folks don't feel very comfortable to actually inhabit their body. And for obvious reasons, because their bodies has been a source of pain and suffering. So what happens with a lot of survivors that I work with is that they tend to kind of live from their necks and above, because that's kind of the only safe way that they can kind of be in life. So part of the antidote is to get them to reconnect to their body in a really safe, very gentle way. So, no like intense catharsis, I think, in sexual abuse, because we really kind of need to go very, very slow in order to reestablish these protective mechanisms, and for survivors to listen to their instinctual intelligence without the fear of re-traumatization. So this three-phase somatic experiencing recovery approach to sexual trauma recovery are as follows. So the first stage that's really important is the stabilization of the nervous system. So without the stabilization of the nervous system, if a person is in, GHIA, which is an intense activation, a global high intensity activation, the nervous system doesn't really have the space to receive that sense of safety in the body. So integration, is really not possible because a person is highly hyper aroused or hypo-aroused. So the first stage to this is the stabilization of the nervous system. The second phase is the reestablishing of boundaries and self-protective responses. So what I shared a little bit about, for example, when they were in the traumatic event, before they went into a freeze, did they want to push someone away? Did they want to fight? Or did they want to kind of run away to protect themselves? So reestablishing these self-protective responses is really key in reestablishing healthy boundaries, and also reestablishing a survivor's sense of power. Which leads us to the next phase, which is the empowerment of self and body, including connecting to a healthy sense of who they are. So during sexual abuse, because it is a boundary kind of violation, it can really affect a survivor's sense of self, where they feel that in order to be safe, they might have to go into a fawning response to please, because that was how they survived, or maybe merging with the needs of others. So sometimes that's really common. So reconnecting them to that healthy sense of self, where they know who they are, and also reconnecting to a healthy sense of pleasure, because perhaps, the connection to their sexual pleasure has been thwarted in some way, their connection to their sensuality and, having enjoyment in life, is important to kind of restore that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just going to take a pause here. Does this make sense? Is that kind of landing in the body?
Yeah, sure does.
Yeah.
And I write about this in my book, and I quote the same quote that you started us with Peter Levine. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and
right.
So I'm really appreciating the way that you're sort of just, very carefully giving us the foundation of the work and how it is, and what we need to do at each moment, really, when we find ourselves activated. It's like, well, I'm activated. So my first step is, what do I need right now to just calm my nervous system to get back into a relaxed state, because no integration is possible. And I can't really act from, if I act from that place, I'm just going to perpetuate the state of activation, both in myself and potentially in the people around me as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for talking about that in your book, Marcy. Yeah, that part is really important. And here I would actually like to maybe share certain kind of tips and tools about stabilizing the nervous system.
Great.
Yeah, so as you talked about, why stabilization in the nervous system is so important is because the body really needs rhythm to avoid getting stuck in trauma patterns and to also integrate and process traumatic experiences. So there are different kind of trains of thought on trauma, and there is kind of a tendency that I've noticed in in the world today that focuses a lot on trauma release. And there are certain kind of modalities that kind of can take on more of a cathartic kind of approach, where facilitators can kind of push survivors into the traumatic kind of experiences for them to go through it or to relive it, to release it. But as a trauma therapist, I would like to just share that this is actually not super helpful in terms of trauma recovery, especially with trauma resolution, because that really leads into re-triggering and going deeper into the trauma vortex, which is not really helpful for anyone. So I think it's really important to name it, because in some of my students and where I teach, I've noticed that there is, sometimes a little bit of a pushing in that, and facilitators kind of thinking that that's actually helpful. But what it can do, especially with catharsis, is that it actually reinforces the trauma pattern, which is not super helpful. So really with sexual abuse, the first thing that needs to happen is the stabilization of the nervous system, as well as this thing called titration, and really being able to go very, very slowly and gently at a pace which is extremely soothing and supportive. So really putting awareness, I think, whether you're a trauma survivor or you're working with sexual abuse as a therapist out there, that really paying attention to what can soothe and support the nervous system of an individual is going to be really, really helpful. Yeah. And before we start any kind of, going back into a traumatic event per se, it's really important to resource your client or to resource yourself, and to really track and notice when you're settling, and when you're coming down from perhaps higher activation into a more kind of resource state. So some of the tips that have worked for my clients and for survivors has been, being able just to orient to the present moment, because as I mentioned in the definition of trauma, which is also in your book, Marcy, trauma, when trauma arises or the imprints of trauma arise, it can really take us away from the present moment. And we think that even when we are in the present moment, say we are here, in 2021, our body can feel like we're back in the traumatic event, which maybe, was back, at the time where it happened. So just helping people to differentiate through orienting to their senses, like their eyes, or perhaps through their hearing or their touch or their smell, that they are now in the present moment and not at the traumatic event, can really help to bring them kind of back into the present moment and to kind of separate and distinguish the traumatic imprint from the present moment, which is going to be very, very helpful. So certain processes, such as the process that Marcy did with us in the beginning, to really ground and center, can be very helpful for stabilizing the nervous system. Also exploring with your clients or yourself internal and external resources. So different qualities inside ourselves that can help us to be safe, perhaps certain activities that we like to do that give us a sense of pleasure, a sense of being able to soothe ourselves, can also be very helpful. And tracking the sensations in our body, being able to take a pause, acknowledging what's here. And sometimes when it is appropriate, sometimes some touch work or some supportive touch work can also be very regulating to help people know that they're not alone. Because usually, you know, as Peter Levine said, trauma usually happens when we're isolated and when we're alone and we have no choice and there was no one there to protect ourselves. So bringing in some supportive touch when it's appropriate and with consent can actually help a survivor to feel like they're not alone in the present moment, and that can really help to calm the nervous system down. Yeah. So the last thing that I'd like to share in this summit is to talk about reestablishing boundaries and self-protective responses, which is really, I think, very essential in the healing of sexual abuse, because boundaries and self-protection are resources, and our sense of boundaries are thwarted during the traumatic experience, especially in sexual abuse. So the antidote to sexual trauma is to actually be aware of the fight-flight responses, which are underneath our freeze, and to be able to complete them in the body and the nervous system. And this can be easier. It's kind of something that's easy to say, but hard to do. Mostly also because we live in a society and a culture that really being nice and good is valued over being authentic. So these fight-flight responses are our body's way of keeping us safe. But in our society, we don't live in a world that supports that, really. We live in a world that dismisses our instinct and that instinctual intelligence, and in many cases we avoid them because it's, you know, safer to be nice, or it's we live in a society where we override you know, what we really kind of want to do. So in this way, we almost have to kind of shift and pay attention to how we can override our instincts and this kind of intelligence, which is somatic, and to connect ourselves to what we needed to resolve the trauma of a boundary violation where we needed to protect ourselves and defend ourselves. So I just wanted to name this because in many kind of, you know, sexual abuse instances, coupled with the tendency to override in our society, it can really create a great dissonance in our body and mind, where we want to fight and we want to run away to protect ourselves. But then, you know, somebody might dismiss us, or someone might say, okay, no, or, you know, that's just crazy. You have to be, you know, spiritual, and, you know, just ignore that. I think that can come out a lot in some spiritual kind of circles where we need to be peaceful all the time. However, you know, something that can happen is that it creates a split between the body, the mind, and the heart, because then the body wants to protect itself and the mind wants to do something else and the heart wants to do something else. And this can really create great suffering, actually, and pain for the survivor, and increasing levels of arousal and activation, because they are so kind of split in so many different ways, and it creates a lot of confusion that can lead to more freeze. So I feel that it's important to name that, especially to really help survivors to lessen that split in a way and start to listen more to their bodies, and to respect their bodies, that their body really wanted to keep them safe, and that they can trust this instinct that they have. Because the fight and flight response, like fear or anger, they're expressions of your boundaries, and your self-protection. And this is really your birthright as a human being, is that you have the right to boundaries, to healthy boundaries, and you have the right to protect yourself. So being aware of these fight and flight responses is one of the ways how we can resolve sexual trauma, by completing them, by feeling them in a safe way, and tracking them and allowing the body to complete them can really bring people back into a felt sense of safety inside. And when we can do that, we can regain a sense of empowerment for ourselves. We can feel strong. And more importantly, when that happens, we can move from feeling I can't protect myself, or I'm too overwhelmed, to feeling I can. So I can use my legs to run away. I can use my hands to push someone away. This feeling of I have the resources to protect myself. Yeah. So in a lot of the trauma therapy that I do, it's really about boundary therapy. So being able to really, explore what our no is and what our yes is, and being able to respect our no and also no's of other people around us, and really respect our yeses as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like something in there is the voice, also the no and the voice.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, right, which can get frozen in that time. Yeah.
So just as we wrap up this lecture, certain ways that sexual abuse survivors can really play with boundaries and also protection can be visualizations of maybe or calling in what we call a competent protector. So perhaps during, the time of the sexual abuse, what people really needed was a competent protector, somebody that could have been there to protect. And this is important, especially for young children that have been sexually abused in their developmental years, because children really they can't protect themselves. So they really need kind of adults to protect them during that situation. So something that might be helpful is to think of perhaps a competent protector. If you had a magic wand and if you could wish for anyone, it could be, an animal, it could be a person, it could be perhaps beings from the angelic realms, or anything that can really help for you to feel that sense of safety and protection, and to really invite this, competent protector in, and to notice the sensations inside your body when this competent protector is near and with you. So just noticing any sensations of safety as it comes up. And you can have also as many competent protectors as you need. Like you don't just need, your imagination. You really call on your imagination to be a resource. So if you don't feel 100% safe just with one competent protector, you can often call in also a few as well. Yeah. So this is one tool that you can use to reestablish that sense of boundaries. Another tool that you can also use is to imagine kind of a safe physical or external boundary or external protection that feels just right for you. So this could be anything from, a bubble, an energetic bubble, or perhaps a house that's really, really kind of strong, or a fence or wall, or anything that can help you to come into this space of safety and protection within the boundary. And also within this space and boundary, it's helpful sometimes where we can say, this is my space and no one can enter this space without my permission. And as you kind of say that and articulate that, to notice what happens in your body when you can imagine this very safe space, and to know that nobody can enter this safe space without your permission. So this can really help to restore your birthright of protection and safety. Yeah. And this leads us, I think, also to the free meditation that is on offer on the summit, which is, reestablishing this felt sense of safety. So in this meditation, I also share certain tips of reestablishing that felt sense of safety as well with yourself and also with other people around you.
I'm glad you brought that up. I didn't get to ask you this question. You kind of talked about it, but I'm wondering if there's anything more you want to add about why you wanted to be part of this Healing Sexual Trauma Summit. You yourself wanted to be part.
Yeah, well, I have spent almost 20 years really working with, children and women that have been through, sexual abuse. And this is really like my deep kind of passion in my life, really helping women, especially, the children and women that I work with are mostly from Asian, the Pacific, and, being an Asian woman myself. I really understand what it means to have your sovereignty taken away from you. So just a little bit of a, personal story, I come from a deep kind of intergenerational trauma lineage, which comes from femicide, which is the killing of, girls when they were born, especially in the female side of my family. So I've definitely really experienced, how that has affected my mom and also my greater family, especially with the women on my side, and really understanding how trauma can affect us and it can really rob our sense of sovereignty, and our sense of truth and authenticity. And this is also what sexual abuse can do for survivors. It can really rob us from our sense of sovereignty. And I have a very, very strong, deep dedication and devotion to being more of the antidote for this, issue, not just for women, but really for the planet. And the more we can reclaim that felt sense of safety in the body, and the more we can reconnect to our sense of sovereignty, I really do feel that this is one of the big keys that we are missing in this world today. So, as a champion for women's rights, and especially, in sex trafficking, which is a terrible, horrible human rights violation, I'm really happy to share everything that I know on this topic so that we can create really a safer world. Because this topic of sexual abuse, I think, is something that is very miscontrived, and there's not enough compassion, I think, in the world today. So the more we can be compassionate to ourselves and the more we can keep ourselves safe, we can also really understand and accept other people, and to also prioritize their safety in the world.
Wonderful. Great answer. Thank you. And so Atira Tan, thank you again for everything you brought, everything that you bring, and everything you'll continue to bring to help us heal and help heal our world and our planet. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcy. It's been delightful to be here. And I'd like to thank the audience as well for your kind attention. Yeah. And thank you. Have a beautiful day.